So my interest in eclipses is both professional and personal. Professional because, as those of you who heard me yesterday know, I'm an author and I wrote a book about a long ago total eclipse across the American West. But my interest is also personal because I'm an eclipse chaser. Here I am in Australia last April. That's Chile in 2019, Aruba in 1998. But my first eclipse was in 1970. I was 5 years old, and even now, I remember the excitement of that day. For me, that partial solar eclipse, and more so the total eclipses I've seen as an adult, they're milestones in my life, like birthdays or anniversaries, but more powerful. Whenever an eclipse comes around, I reflect back on who I was the last time I stood in the moon's shadow. Well, what's true for me as an individual, I would argue, is true for America as a whole. Eclipses can serve as milestones that mark our national evolution. They're a chance to reflect on who we were as a country when the moon's shadow visited these shores before. Indeed, before I was born. July 20th, 1963, Alaska and Maine were in the path of totality. The Beatles were on the radio. JFK was in the White House. June 8th, 1918, the moon's shadow traversed the country diagonally from Washington State to Florida. Woodrow Wilson was president. World War I was nearing its end. August 7th, 1869, the path of the total solar eclipse crossed the Midwest and the South, including Tennessee, where a gubernatorial election was closely watched now that the Civil War was over and African Americans were casting votes. Suffice it to say, Americans have been fascinated with solar eclipses as long as America has existed. In the almost 250 years since our nation declared its independence, 24 total eclipses have crossed the current territory of the contiguous United States, and a few more have crossed Alaska and Hawaii. Some have particularly interesting stories to tell and were witnessed by noteworthy people, and I'll mention just a couple of examples. And thank you to Michael Zeiler for that map. My favorite eclipse, as you might imagine, is the total eclipse of 1878, the subject of my book. It crossed the American frontier from Montana Territory down to Texas, and it came at a time when the United States was looked down upon by European countries. We were seen as bumpkins, not very intellectual. Well, the eclipse of 1878, like the moon landing a century later, rallied the public around science. It gave our young country an opportunity to prove itself on the international stage when it came to astronomy. Dozens of the era's great scientists raced out to Texas, Colorado, and Wyoming to observe the eclipse, to try to solve some of the deepest mysteries of the sun and solar system. And among those who headed west was this young man folding his arms and frowning. That's Thomas Edison. He traveled to Wyoming to see the eclipse to test a recent invention called the tesimeter. It was said at the time that it was going to be bigger than the phonograph. Well, we all know what happened with that. Also traveling west for the eclipse was the most famous female scientist in America, Maria Mitchell. She was an astronomer who taught at Vassar College, and in 1878, she led an all-female expedition to Denver, which was a scientific endeavor, but it was more than that. It was also a political statement, an early effort to show what women could do in science. More than 70 years before the 1878 eclipse, in 1806, a total eclipse crossed Ohio and upstate New York, areas that will again see the moon's shadow next April. And one notable person who witnessed that eclipse was the American writer James Fenimore Cooper, famous for his novel, Last of the Mohicans. The eclipse visited his hometown of Cooperstown, New York, when he was just 17 years old. Many years later, he wrote up his memories of what for him was the most profound experience of his life. Indeed, it was a profound experience for his entire community. Women stood in the open street near me with streaming eyes and clasped hands, Cooper wrote, and sobs were audible in different directions. Even the educated and reflecting men at my side continued silent in thought. I have passed a varied and eventful life, Cooper wrote in later years. It has been my fortune to see earth, heavens, ocean, and man in most of their aspects. But never have I beheld any spectacle which so plainly manifested the majesty of the Creator or so forcibly taught the lesson of humility to man as a total eclipse of the sun. As you can see, the deeply human experience of a total eclipse has not really changed in more than 2 centuries. So here's a tip to those of you who are doing outreach in your communities for next year's eclipse. I'd encourage you to add some history to what you're doing. Not everyone is immediately interested in science, but everyone is interested in people. How did locals in your area respond when an eclipse happened generations ago? Did they celebrate? Did they cower in fear? Well, these days, thanks to the internet, it's easy to do this kind of historical research. And I've actually written an easy, free, step-by-step guide for how to create your own local eclipse history exhibit. And I'll give the URL again at the end of this talk. But I encourage you to check that out because it's very easy. In all of an hour or two, you could find wonderful articles from your own community about how people reacted in the 19th century or early 20th century. Anyway, just to wrap up, a final point. Eclipses don't just connect the present with the past, they connect the present with the future. Eclipses are so incredibly predictable that they encourage us not just to look backward, but forward. On January 24th, 1925, a total eclipse crossed Pennsylvania. And a few days beforehand, a local astronomer gave a lecture. He explained that this would likely be the only total eclipse that many Pennsylvanians would have an opportunity to see in their lifetimes. The next one that would come nearby, he said, would not occur until April 8th, 2024. Which makes me wonder, what will people be saying and thinking about us on August 12th, 2045? September 14th, 2099. And October 17th, 2153, when the moon's shadow will undoubtedly return to these shores, but what life will be like for those of us, for those who witness it, we can only imagine. So there is the URL for my tips on how to do your own local eclipse history exhibit, and the website for my book where you can reach me if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk later today or anytime. So thank you.
Just to second the effectiveness of what David just said. So Dan Schneiderman in our community has been using the fact that in the 1925 eclipse that did come through Rochester, so many thousands of people gathered on a bridge that it cracked. So we have photos of that crack, and Dan has been using that to great effect in his outrage. It's really cool, right? Unfortunately, that same bridge is going to be under construction next year, like one of the best places to watch the eclipse from. Yeah, don't get me started.
It's under construction.
Yeah. Up next, Harrison Neer on community to continuity, documenting. This is about documenting. Fantastic. Perfect. Document there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. I want to give a little preface explanation to the slides before I begin. They have nothing to do with what I'm talking about, except that I'm teasing and sharing with you all stills from a development shoot that we did for the film that we're working on, me and David, who are here, the documentary called Totality. So I'm teasing, as I move through what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm just going to bring you through some of our work. You are the film's community to a certain extent, a small portion of it, but an important portion. And so I wanted to draw you in and share some of the stuff we've been doing so far. So that's what's going to be happening here. It might be a little distracting, but hopefully fun for you all to see what we're doing. Okay, great. So I want to start by offering a reframe. What if the eclipse is a starting line? And all we're doing to prepare our families, our businesses, and our communities for this event is a setup for something in us to say, go. All this work you're doing is for more than just a moment. We're working towards the emergence of something new in ourselves and in our communities that wants to be born. My name is Harrison Neer. I'm a creative producer, a filmmaker, and a songwriter. interested in the power of stories to catalyze human connection, both in community with other humans and with non-human life and spirit. What brings me here today is my role as a researcher and associate producer working with Cue Ball Productions and Sandbox Films in the making of a film we're calling Totality. You might be able to guess what the film is about. As I begin, here we're back in the same situation. This way. There we go. I want to make it clear that unlike the esteemed folks who I'm sharing this podium with, I'm no expert on the topic of eclipses. 2024 will be my first total eclipse. Why I'm up here is because, like many of you, I've been tasked to think creatively about a problematic question. After the 2024 eclipse is over, what then? How do you create continuity in relationship to the eclipse experience and sustain or even expand the sense of community we've all gained in anticipation of the event? This is the question I want to take up in conversation with you, the question of continuity. My intention with this talk is to leave you inspired to create continuity based on the experience you've achieved for yourself and for your community around the coming total eclipse. I also hope to get you clear on how to take the first steps or recognize the steps you've already taken towards a vision for sustained engagement that centers your unique contributions. So let me take it back to the work I've been doing in preparation for April 8th. Click. They're also screenshots, so I didn't get the highest quality images, so they'll be much nicer on the film. In March, I began conducting research and outreach on behalf of Totality. Essentially, my role has been to map the continent, a la Michael Zeiler, except I'm drawing paths of potential constituents in their stories through which we could weave a greater narrative that with some craftsmanship will become the film. To date, I've talked to hundreds of people, from organizers to Umbrophiles, educators to NASA scientists, journalists to government officials, many of who are here, all distinctly and often intensely invested in this event. What I've come to understand from these conversations, beyond how to view an eclipse safely or the real purpose of a giant blow-up sun, shout out to Dan Schneiderman in Rochester, is the power of an eclipse to call us back to our creativity in service of others. Click. Have you noticed that a total solar eclipse is really good at getting adult human beings to drastically change their lives or to innovate in service of others, often on their own time and dime? Have you noticed that? From a plastic surgeon who has written a 500-page book on eclipse photography to a media marketing CEO who is actively co-chairing the AAS Eclipse Task Force, to a risk-taking producer broadcasting eclipse from remote locations like undeveloped islands in Micronesia and illegal locations in Western China. I've talked to so many people who have returned to or begun living an unconventional creative life upon joining the eclipse cause. And as we know, sometimes we don't choose this path. Sometimes the path at the eclipse comes directly over your home, your city, your town, and suddenly you're involved and invested in this thing you may have never even thought of before. That's the way an eclipse can act as a catalyst for human innovation, and creativity has become a driving fascination for me, and I believe it will have a great influence on our film. Furthermore, I think that that understanding the catalytic potentiality may hold the key to creating continuity in your community's eclipse experience as well. So what if we saw the eclipse as a starting line? Not necessarily for ourselves who are already invested and involved, but for everyone else who we've succeeded in safely ushering under the umbra. With that many geniuses inspired, what could we accomplish? I want you to take some time now and over this weekend to try on this reframed purpose. How can you provide opportunities not only leading up to the event, but especially afterwards for inspired souls to offer their unique creativity in service of sustained experiences? This means leaving your channels open and having a system of communication available throughout the days and months after the event that will allow people to connect, relate, and share their work. Yes, we're all going to be very tired on April 9th, but it's important that we see that next season as a deeply valuable time, which requires infrastructure and communications alongside rest and rejuvenation. I want to shout out Robin Higdon, especially from the San Francisco Exploratorium, for making this point very clear to me. As an example of what this could look like, with Totality, we're setting up a crowdsourcing component, drawing inspiration from 2017 predecessors like the Eclipse Mega Movie and Citizen Kate, now the Deb Initiative. We're going to create a call for student, amateur, and professional filmmakers along the path to submit a few minutes of footage from their eclipse experience. This footage will be used to construct a kaleidoscopic intercut collage that will serve as the film's cinematic climax. In this way, we're setting up a path for inspired creativity to take root at totality, and then as the film takes off, to nourish that community with communications, behind the scenes insights, on-screen credit, perhaps opportunities to screen the film, and more to be decided. By providing an outlet or pathway to direct the inspiration ignited by the total eclipse, we can catalyze community around the film and create a sense of continuity that can run for years beyond the event, and in its path, hopefully inspire the next generation that will prepare Americans for the 2045 event. So, if filmmaking is your creative outlet, I want to invite you to participate by going to totalityfilm.com and filling out our filmmaker interest form. The website hasn't launched yet, but it will launch in the next few weeks. If filmmaking is not your creative outlet, I want to invite you to think about your own authentic creative outlet. How do you want to channel the energy from the eclipse into your life and outward? Once you have an answer, start to talk about it with others, because this continuity, it requires community. It requires accountability to others. It requires support. So create channels for your community to come to you after the eclipse, to present ideas or offer feedback, and to develop a communally driven path towards the innovation you want to create or the story you want to tell. This is how we all can move from totality through community to continuity. Thanks very much. Oh, I missed this one. More in Rochester. And there's them.
Great.
It's a hug. Wow.
Don't forget the well. I'm coming back to you, Dan McGlone. Don't you worry. But next up, oh no, yes, you are next up. Oh, I can hug you in advance. Dan McGlone. Child mode.
I have channeled my inner child. Yes. Here we go. Thank you, Kate, for that. Oh, here we are. So first of all, thank you to the AAS. This is the third of a bunch of wonderful conferences. I am so honored to be here, and thank you for all the work that you guys have done. Really appreciated. I am, which way do I go with this? I go that way. I am Dan McGlone. I run Eclipse 2024. Eclipse2024.org. Many of you have visited it. If you have not, please do. I will give you a personal tour. I live in Clayton, Indiana, which is west of Indianapolis. I live in the path, so I'm going to watch the eclipse from my house. The 1869 eclipse, David, went over my city. I missed it. The 2153 eclipse goes over my house. And, you know, the hotels will not open the reservation systems yet. I'm really trying, but they won't do it. So some of the things, this is one of the posters. There are some things to pick up. I'm not doing a plug for my site right now. What I am going to do, but there's my eclipse simulator. It is getting a lot of traction. It's being used a lot by people to show the differences between the edge, inside the path, outside the path. A lot of the things that we're trying to evangelize to all the communities and schools. But it's available at eclipse20simulator.solar as well. And it's going to live on past the eclipse. This is about what is next, what's coming up. And I've got a lot of requests from people. Hey, can you make it show the weather? And of course, we're gonna have clear skies on eclipse day. So there's no reason for me to even go to that effort, which would be formidable. Can you put like a fan that cools you down during totality? Because that's a great idea, right? Can you have crowd noise? Okay, fine. Can you do animals? Can you find the button? Can you do animals, insects, bird sounds? Okay, fine. Those are things that people have actually suggested to me, but things that I really do want to do with it, I want to get a 360-degree view so you can see the orange glow behind you. I want to introduce some double diamonds, which Michael's work has inspired greatly. If you aren't familiar with that, I'd suggest you check out his work, his flyovers. They're amazing. I'd like to make the projection a little better. I'd like to, because the 2027 eclipse goes pretty much right overhead in the Middle East, and we need to be able to show that. And I'm working right now on a new, completely from scratch method of analyzing the LRO, the LOLA data from NASA, to get a better or more easily adaptable lunar limb profile that can be presented to a generation with TikTok attention span. That's kind of what we're looking for. And I've had to do a lot of work on the regular eclipse calculator. I do all my own calculations from scratch, my own Besselian elements, everything from the ephemerides. And so I'm really wanting to include that as something that's going forward. It would be nice to do some research on the solar radius. So Luca Quaglia is doing a lot of work on that. And we're kind of getting to the point where we're realizing ours' value isn't large enough. The oblateness of the sun, that's not going to really enter into a visual, but that's interesting research that's happening. And I'd like to find someone. I just had a milestone birthday, and I'm hoping to be here for the 2045 eclipse. But I'd like to find someone to become a mentee for the calculations that we do. So eclipse is moving forward. Everybody's talking about 2045. 2045, going to be in Disney World. It's the day after my 82nd birthday. I'm going to be in Disney World, or I'm going to have a better view of it. We don't know. But Australia, Kate's going to talk about that. But I do want to just say, I'm sorry, Brisbane and then Sydney, back-to-back years. What the heck? Who ordered that? That's awesome. I can't even wait for that. I hope I get to see that. But I want to share an experience I had in 2012 here in Texas in Big Spring State Park. I almost didn't go on this trip, like the day before. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go, because it is all about the eclipse stories. It's about the personal things that we experience when we travel. And that's kind of a metaphor for life, right? You don't know what's going to happen when you go. You just go and the stories write themselves. And that's what we're all about. I was in Big Spring, and look where it's not at. It's not in the path. It's just beyond the path. But what happened with that, and I'm sorry I didn't have an HD camera with me, but I found a spot that I couldn't believe. This is sped up 8 times. Watch the beads on the horizon. Watch the beads at the top. I saw this with my own eyes, y'all. It's my video camera. Yeah, it's on YouTube. Anyway, that's the coolest thing ever. So, but how do we predict when things are at the horizon? We have this thing called atmospheric refraction, where things below the horizon appear higher, and we can't really calculate it, because you think about it, if you have 100 kilometers of sky above you, you've got like 1,000 kilometers of different layers of atmosphere, pressure gradients, temperature inversions, all these things that Snell's law notwithstanding, all the physics books say, well, in a clear air mass with no variability, it's a pretty complicated integral, let me tell you what. So how do we predict that? We can't really predict it, but what we can do, and I've made movies of, this is my animation, kind of simulator light, where I've added a refraction. So let's just watch what's going to happen. This is actually from Big Spring. This is my animation where we're running the exact same thing you just saw. And here comes the horizon. And this is also sped up and refraction is going to affect it. So what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to simulate that without going through a big explanation to people of, set your own refraction and hope? People are going to make plans. And I got lucky, but I don't want to be responsible. This, by the way, is the 8 times sped up version of the animation at a refraction that I thought was suitable. Check out how accurate, but math. So yeah, I mean, yeah, why not, right? Okay, 2045, everybody's talking. This is 2044. A beautiful sunrise eclipse on the northwest coast of Greenland. How can you fail? Grise Fjord, Resolute, Great Bear Lake, on down through Fort Nelson, Edmonton, Calgary, Medicine Hat, Swift Current. If 2024 is the Eastern, the Maritimes eclipse, this is Western Canada's eclipse. And I did check, and it's taken the domain greatcanadianeclipse.com. It's not available. I'm sorry. Check out where Dickinson, North Dakota is. And remember what happened with me in Big Spring. But this is a total eclipse. So what's going to happen? Well, just exactly what you think is going to happen. We're going to have totality, and then the sun is going to, and it's going to be beautiful, and the sun's going to set. So that's kind of cool if you're in Dickinson. But what if you're a little bit farther east, just a hair farther east? Wouldn't it be cool to see an eclipse where the sun set as a partial and then the corona burst over the horizon. Wouldn't that be cool? Wow. So 2044's got some stuff that we can take a look at. And I hope that everybody, this is one more view of that eclipse, and this is the last thing I have. I have an entire set of astronomy resources that are not public facing that I'm going to turn into an astronomy curriculum. All the things I wish I had visual when I was 10 and learning all this stuff, really important. And this is my favorite. This is make your own eclipse, where you can set the lunar and solar, you can set the day so that the orientation of the Earth is correct. You can also change your view. And this is that shadow scraping out that weird path. And when you look at it like this and you realize there's the fundamental plane, and so the shadow is just kind of scraping across the Earth, you see why we get those weird shapes. And there's the shadow. You're looking right down the maw of the shadow, and you see it doing its 5.1 degree descending node thing. And I can turn it backwards and forwards and now you can see it kind of in a different. So this is make your own eclipse, but I can simulate any eclipse just with the very simple geometry of a cone and a sphere. And once again, math. So there's some links for you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Truly appreciate it. I wish every one of you a cielo claro, ciel dégagé, and clear sky. Toda la información en nuestro sitio se ofrece también en español.
I love that this is a community where you can say math and nobody goes, oh. Love that. Finally, final presentation, Kate, being in the shadow, helping Australia shine.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Your website is amazing, and I love those simulations. All the communities that I've been involved in, we share those images, and it makes it so real. So if you're in the community and you haven't looked at that yet, take a look at his website. So as he said, there's actually a few eclipses before 2045. And let me show you why this makes me very excited. Oh, actually, I won't. I'll just tell you about the task force. So we've been meeting as a task force for many years, and these have become my family. We gather and Zoom, and it's just been very regular for many years. And there's already talk about the fact that at the end of this eclipse in April next year, that, the task force will end. There's conversations here at this meeting that this is going to be the last meeting. Now, I don't know about you, but this actually makes me panic. But just to say how supportive and how encouraging, and the amount of resources that have been made available to everybody. So just want to acknowledge the role of the AAS. So thank you very much to all the leadership team and everyone who's in the task force as well. But it's like we all share what we love. It's not hard, right? So this is the next 15 years, until 2038. And look at crazy Australia. There's a lot going on. So we are very lucky that in 15 years, we have 5 total solar eclipses. And now we just had one in April. That was the first one. And it was a teeny tiny one. I don't know if you can make it out from over there. Just raised the tip of Western Australia. Hands up if you were there. Yeah. It was a bit tricky to get to, but so that was the first one. And there were some challenges in how that was planned. So, I was involved in the planning there and also involved in here for many years. I'm so struck at the chalk and cheese difference between how it was very safety focused and you can't look at the sun. That was the official. You can't use solar filters. That was the official guidance in Australia, versus all this here where there's so many things going on and we're encouraging everybody. We've got giant glasses, eclipse tents. It's just great. So I worry about, the task force ending, and then I'm carrying on like solo in Australia. So the plea is, don't leave me. I need you. I need all of you. And even though you're not a member, if not all of you are a member of the task force, if you're sitting there and you're in a community and you think, oh, that's sad, you can actually help me. So I'll explain why and how you can help me. You can help efforts for Australia. So as we know, and we've heard a lot during this meeting, it takes a village. And Rick said last meeting, I love that phrase, Rick. So I'm quoting you forever from now on, and I'm dedicating that image to you. So who do you align with, just so we can point it out in future? Oh, my apologies. I'm sorry. You're diverting from the question though. Which one do you align with the most? Brilliant. But it is true. You can't do eclipse planning on your own. You really need a team behind you. Like, when you're in your communities now, you might be the person who you feel is in charge and doing all the heavy lifting, but you need your team. And you remember the guidance from the white paper, assemble your team, develop your strategy, and boldly go. So in Australia, I've been looking at partners for how we can move forward with eclipse planning, because we know that it can't really happen the way it happened for this past eclipse. There were so many errors, so many things that didn't go well. The planning and logistics of it was brilliant. It was amazing, and there was no fault there. But just the approach and how the messaging, we did have messages of, this is 96% totality. People were being advised to go to places along the coast for good viewing, even though it was outside of the path. There were so many errors, and it was difficult to actually get things shifted. So because there are so many, the eclipse paths goes across Australia, most of the states, we need a national approach. And I'm really very keen to make sure we have something like this set up as a task force. And it's, where is that best positioned? And so, there's science groups in Australia, there's the astronomical groups, but we don't have this cohesion already. So there's individuals that are out there, we're wanting to work together. And I have found the perfect home, I think, and it's the Griffith Institute of Tourism. And the reason why I'm going for this as the home, so I've made approaches to be an adjunct for this institution. They already do research in the areas that the paths cross, and they actually are the ones who are getting a lot of the grant funding, leading the tourism approaches. And also Australia, Queensland, we have the Olympics in 2032. Yes, 2032 in Brisbane. So there is a huge amount of resources already in place. Community development, lots of consultations going. The infrastructure is there. The process of planning big events is there. And so for me, it's all about, when I advise communities, it's what's already happening on the ground. How can you actually just add that, use those resources to be able to do what you need? So I'm thinking that we can set up an advisory panel, tap into these things. I can access a lot more funding, bring some of you guys over so you can share experiences and share your resources. And that's kind of, form our little village people over there. And just so Griffith University has research clusters. So I'll come back to those in a minute. So this is a closer detail map of where all the paths go. And I'm just going to show you a particular area of interest. That's in Queensland. Remember that Queensland is hosting the Olympics in 2032. All the investment of event planning management is in Queensland. And thank you. And that's where the resources are. And coincidentally, there's community in the crossroads there that actually has a science, what is it? I can't remember, a particular drive. So it's an outback area. There's the Cosmos Centre. They're developing it for the dark sky tourism of Australia. And so it's a really natural fit to be able to build resources and to use that as a particular location of focus. And Griffith University already has a lot of programming going into this particular region. coincidentally. So I'm looking at just tapping into that to be able to use that as the framework to build up for eclipse planning. So, you know how I said that they had research streams? Now, what's really interesting is I was able to relate every single one of their research streams to eclipse planning. How cool is that? So I was able to convince them that actually this is a good home because we know we look at weather. We are very fascinated by weather. And the last few years of planning, we've had, you know, in 2017, there were all the fires in Oregon. So climate change is impacting how we chase eclipses and how we need to prepare. In Australia in April, just before the eclipse, the week or two before, the coast was hit by a Category 5 cyclone, very devastating. We're going to have more cyclones. The heat records this year, and also, you know, some of the path is in the tornado alley. So research about this is needed. So another stream is their events and sport management. So I was telling you that there's a whole lot of resources in there about a major event planning. So I was able to highlight that this framework, this approach is kind of similar to what we've been doing. And so that's a natural fit there. The future of aviation. So of course, there's all the eclipse flights. Hands up if you've done an eclipse flight, an E-flight. Of course, Dan. And you have as well, Chris? So a couple of people have done that. And there's also the space flights that are happening now too. So the space industry and space tourism is certainly moving ahead. Resilient and sustainable tourism. This is the area that's huge. And this is where I've already started to do a fair bit of work. So I've done a lot of presentations in Australia about building sustainable tourism events around eclipses and dark sky tourism. So we're sort of linking the two together because we think that's a much stronger way forward. And there's been lots of preliminary research about the future of dark sky tourism, I think it's called in Australia. So a lot of that has already been done. But a long way to go. But there's funding for these things. So funding means that we're able to leverage the resources out there already and build upon that to be able to gather our team. The visitor economy and data analytics and indicators. It was so fabulous to have Michael's maps of the visitation. And, you know, I think that was quite an eye-opener for them to see that all this data is there. Like we have a huge amount of resources within our little eclipse community. And just how record-breaking the eclipses are in terms of the interest. And then special research areas. So my own project that I'm doing, so they have a biosensor lab in Australia, but the project that I'm doing, and I've got a poster on this if you want to read it further, but it's using EEG technologies to measure ore as it happens in the field. That is new and different. We're trialing it in October at Garner State Park in the Solar Eclipse Village. But it's that sort of stuff. It's projects like that that give it high profile and that you tap into their research community. And I also, you know, I've linked in with the Adventure Tourism Research Association. So that's the network that academic research that I have presented several times now on eclipse chasing and eclipse tourism. And I continue to do my little projects. After most eclipses, I interview lots and lots of people. So I gather stories and storytelling, and that informs how we communicate about the eclipse experience and our understanding of awe. So in the next few years, I'm switching over to more academic side of things. So that's why you've seen me, you know, do the project and some of the other bits and pieces I'm doing. So how can you help me? When you're planning for the eclipse and whatever you're doing for your community, evaluate the impact that it's having, like capture the web traffic, capture stats that shows the interest, capture write your research reports afterwards, because these events happen. And if the reports are not written up, people move on, all the data is lost. And it doesn't have to be like a big publishable report. Even a couple of pages about, okay, this is what we planned, this is what we expected, this is what happened, this is how many people, here's how we got some feedback from these people. And we can calculate now, according to Michael's statistics of, is it $200 or $300 per person per night?
Between $200 and $300 per person per day.
Yeah. So we can use that as a pretty good rough calculation. So do gather that and then send that into the AAS. So Deb is probably going to collate information like that. Because we need a place to bring all this information together. Consider involvement in Australia. Help me out. Share your expertise. So I'm hoping to get events like this going. So consider coming over. And so any of those research clusters. So I'm going to be looking at different ways of getting into that. So if you've got your own projects or things that you're doing and it taps into any of those, reach out to me, because we can actually look to see if you can be part of the bigger team. So remember, it's all about assembling your team, developing your strategy, and boldly going where no one's gone before. So I have some resources. So over the years, this year, it's been a very busy year. I've done a few posters for this event. So I'll be updating my community eclipse planning white paper after this eclipse. So I've already done the hindsight interviews for some of the events in April there for the Australian eclipse. But after this eclipse, I always tend to stay and interview people who've done the events. So afterwards, if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me, or I might reach out to you. And then hindsight lessons, again, that gets fed into then the next version of the white paper, which will be focused on the Australian eclipses. So lots of resources there. And that's just a reminder while that's up. Okay. So don't leave me and come to Australia, because it's, we've got a lot of eclipses. I've moved back there now, so that's no coincidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. You know, it's sort of the power of communities and these phones, where, as Kate was talking about needing data, needing impact data, I texted my main data guy at the Rochester Institute of Technology, a tourism researcher named Mohammed Keskin, and I said, are you planning, or someone on your team planning, to collect data on the impact of the 2024 eclipse on Rochester? He said, why, yes. And I said, I have a person to connect you with. So that's how fast it happens these days during the last part of your talk. Okay, a couple of, now we have a 15-minute break. Then from 3 to 4, we have a couple of breakout sessions. Now, one is for the Simons Foundation folks only. This is exclusively for you guys. It's up on the second floor in the room that has the U-shaped setup of desks. We here have resource showcases and demos. So we encourage everybody to walk around. Those who have brought your stuff, please get to your stuff so you can explain your stuff. Okay. Also, during that time, I plan to bring my camera outside. And if anybody who would like to record their 1 to 2 minute eclipse stories for just in front of me, I would really appreciate being able to record them. Outside, yes, because it's going to be a lot less noisy than inside where we're all talking about tech. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Is it? I thought we had run over. Oh, sorry.
Are we out of time?
We're kind of. Oh, I was just miscalculating.
It's Central Time.
Thank you, honey. I rescind the hug, Dan McGlon. Questions, please. Yes. You have yeah. Is that okay?
So I have one, especially for those of you who have, eclipse chasers, and for Kate, I'll show you, because I don't know the answer to this. I'm assuming it gets rather dark enough. Can you see aurora during a total solar eclipse?
He went to Svalbard, had no right to see that.
In 2015, I went to Svalbard, which is an Arctic archipelago. And to visualize where it is, if you don't know, think of the northern tip of Norway and the North Pole. And Svalbard is almost exactly halfway in between. It's 78 degrees north latitude. And so I went to see an eclipse there in 2015. The night before the eclipse, I attended a lecture. There's a university there, the northernmost university in the world, of course. And there was a professor that gave a lecture. This professor was an aurora specialist. And he advised us to look for the aurora during eclipse. It's theoretically possible. There's no theoretical reason why you can't have aurora during the eclipse. We looked, we didn't see it, but that same night we saw the most amazing aurora. One of the best days of my life.
Two quick things. Well, one, wearing my museum hat, whatever swag or materials you produce for the eclipse, please, either donate to your museum or local historical society. If we want to continue those stories decades, if not 100 years later, we kind of need copies of everything. So please talk to your local archivist and make sure that, we can be able to pull articles from 1878 or 1925 or even 1806. My question is kind of a rough poll for the group here and then for the task force. Who here is planning on being an organizer for 2044 and 2045?
Yes.
Yeah. Because one thought that I kind of had as we're thinking about this being the last one is, well, we need to write down all of our processes and how the task force was formed, knowing that, in about 15 years, we're going to have to kick everything up again. And I want to make sure that, all of Kate's note about how she traveled continues, or how the task force was formed, and making sure that we have that continue. We're continuing the conversation. We're just taking, a trip to Australia, but making sure that that next generation is prepared.
Might I throw something in on that? I believe it for no other reason than just so they can see how quaint our technology is.
Yes.
But I encourage every single community I talk to have art contests at the elementary school. Put this stuff in a time capsule. Make the story that the future people, and tell your kindergartners, they're writing stories to people they'll never meet. It's a very powerful.
And if anyone is a educator, start training the next Angela and Rick. We're gonna really need them.
All right.
Perfect.
So I just had one question and then one observation. My question, Dan, you mentioned double diamonds. Is that like at the edge?
Yeah, I could also talk to this one, but it's where you essentially have two diamond rings at once, because there just happen to be two valleys on the moon where the last bit of sunlight is covered almost simultaneously.
So my suggestion is San Antonio is a perfect spot because they've got half in totality, half and not. A lot of people along that. I don't know if that's going to work.
That are almost like parallel to the track. Honestly, I hate to keep doing this, but Michael's flyovers and maps show them very explicitly, and there's a real good mathematical explanation for why they happen, and or geometrical if you want it.
Is San Antonio, Michael, a good spot for that?
I need to look. I don't know I don't know off the top of my head. But if you look at my detailed maps that show either that show either the shape of the moon, and what you'll see on my detailed maps is the shape of the moon is not a perfect oval. Rather, it's a polygon with some straight segments that are connected. And it turns out, and I thought about this for a while, and then I realized about 10 years ago, what the physical meaning of the places where two segments in the polygon join, that angle point. And I realized after a while that each segment was the influence of one particular Bailey speed, one last Bailey speed that became the diamond ring. But at the intersection of the two of those straight segments, logically, that means you've got two Bailey's beads that are producing the diamond ring. And so that was the source of that insight.
We'll apply a formula to that and try to quantize that.
So I just wanted to follow up on what Michael was saying, because we've been making videos in both English and Spanish that are all really short, and they cover all sorts of aspects of eclipses. But one of them was using, in fact, Michael's video of a flyover, but also some graphics to explain the polygon shape that he's talking about, and then why you see the shape of the shadow that you do, along with the topography of the Earth. So it's basically taking what Michael was just talking about to explain the double diamond, but it's really more simple than that about where you actually have the shadow on the ground and what it looks like. But we made it into a 2-minute YouTube video, and it's in English and Spanish, and I will share it somewhere you can find it.
Might I say one more thing about that? It also depends, and correct me if I'm wrong, on the topography of the Earth where you're at, because that line follows the topography and can affect it as well.
So just,
But
just a quick follow-up. I just want to acknowledge my table mate, Kate, who comes from Little Rock, which is the next Carbondale, because the 24 and 45 eclipse cross over Little Rock. So if you're planning for the future, I think that's a good one. And to acknowledge that the rest of her team is in Hawaii and she's here. So that might turn out to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate.
I just want to make everyone aware. I've been involved in opening up several time capsules, like from the 60s and the 70s. And every last one of them was full of water. So be wary.
So maybe don't bury them.
Yeah, right.
Don't bury them.
Wrap them up in tar paper and coat them with tar.
tell you, you can't even see it.
Well, that's an excellent segue for something that I wanted to bring up. So time capsule wise, an idea that came up from middle of yesterday's talks. If there's anybody who wants to get together and create a compilation of videos, I would love to gather audio and video from children after the annular and the total, not only talking about their experience, but passing on the message of what the future kids can expect and look forward to when they see their first total solar eclipse. And I think that's something that we could be able to do, you know, in perpetuity across, you know, multiple cultures, languages. So give it some thought. Let me know what you think.